Right, good afternoon, ladies. We'll start a second early. Briefly, the very urgent and prioritised emergency evacuation announcement. Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the nearest exit, which is behind Simon. There is one fire exit in the room. If you need to evacuate the room, do so by the glass door, external fire exit staircase. Please hold both handrails in case the stairs are wet or slippery. If anyone is unable to use the stairs, would they please allow others to exit before they go down the fire escape, where you can be given assistance. Our assembly point is the public car park beside the civic suite. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that this meeting is audio recorded. And can you please remind you to switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent?
On that point, Chairman, can I ask why we aren't being audio recorded at this time? We are there, it's very smart.
Yep, we are, and we've got to speak up loudly because we've had communications issues again, I understand. So, but it is being recorded, so please speak up as clearly as you can. Apologies for absence, I don't think we've got any. Non-members attending, we have Councillor Ward, Councillor Mrs Shaw, and the minutes from the meeting held on the 7th of October 2019. As far as I'm aware, I haven't heard anything. I don't think Sonia has, so can we take those as accepted?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? Mike?
Just because it's mentioned in item 5, I do back onto the Coldbridge site, Man's Lane, Windermere Avenue, and it's, I've been advised it's for planning purposes of peculiar interest, but I don't think that is relevant here for that.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. Right, on to item number 5, which is, I think, going to be in our usual format, which I will pass over to Dan to highlight any issues. You'll then have every opportunity to ask any questions or raise any points that you wish to, and then we'll go from there. Dan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So this report has been put together in response to a request made at the last meeting of the Planning Policy Subcommittee. Members requested quarterly updates through the subcommittee on housing delivery. So this report has been put together and it covers effectively 2 quarters. So from April 2019 to September 2019. Obviously future meetings of the subcommittee will pick up future quarters, including the quarter that has just ended. Members might be aware, or they hopefully are aware, that the Council recently published its first Housing Delivery Test Action Plan. So the Housing Delivery Test is something that has been introduced through changes to national policy, and it basically assesses each local authority's performance over the previous 3 years. So it assesses the number of homes that have been delivered relative to how many should have been delivered over that period. And various tiers of undelivery are penalised in various ways, one of which is to produce an action plan which members have previously seen and agreed. So what I would summarise really is that over the period April 2019 to September 2019, we estimate that around 106 homes have been completed, which comprises 70 market houses and 36 affordable houses. So 106 over effectively a 6-month period extrapolated would work out at around 212 homes over the course of a year if it stayed stable over the remainder of the year, which would be a shortfall against the Council's adopted housing target and a relatively large shortfall against its local housing need figure, which is basically how many homes the government thinks we should be delivering. However, just in terms of some caveats on that, what I would say is that there's relatively strong evidence to suggest that that more than 212 dwellings will be completed over the course of the year. mainly because a large number of the strategic sites have now commenced, and whereas previously it was really only Hall Road in Rochford and Star Lane Brickworks in Great Wakering that were delivering houses at any kind of appreciable scale. Now we have had technical starts in West Rayleigh, in Holbridge, and combined with continued delivery at Hall Road and the second Star Lane site in Great Wakering. So my professional opinion would be that it's likely that we will see more than 212 dwellings completed in that year. But whether it's still a shortfall against the 385 local housing need figure, there is some likelihood of that happening. The only other caveat that I would provide on those numbers really is that interim monitoring, so within the year trying to monitor completions can be quite difficult. So quite often there are delays in developers declaring completions, and there are probably about 101 different ways of representing completion. We often rely on having them being signed off by building control or private building inspectors, and that is a process that, through my experience, I would say often sees delays. For example, we were not aware of many of the completions on Ponchase Nursery until about 6 months after they had been signed off, such is the nature of some of the reporting from the private building inspectors. So there is some likelihood that 106 that I've just mentioned is an underestimation. It could easily be 120 or 130 homes once you add some allowance for that under delivery. And I suppose the only other thing I would say is, clearly we have this housing delivery test action plan. It has actions in there, short term, medium term and long term, that are aimed at obviously trying to improve delivery over the next 5, 10, 15 years. My, I guess, recommendation really is that there's probably no need to really deviate from that action plan at the current time. I think it's probably still an appropriate course of action to take in response to this delivery, but clearly there is a lot of value in continuing to monitor delivery over future periods through the subcommittee, and if members see fit to take additional actions or different actions, then that's obviously something that we can have regard to. But we have also clearly got other sites in the pipeline that may come before the development committee in the next few months. South East Ashington is one, and subject to their delivery, that's an appreciable number of houses on those sites as well. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have on any of that.
Yes,
Councillor Mrs Mason first, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said there was a difficulty in ascertaining the number of completions at the half-year stage. Surely the same would be applied to the end of the year stage. The difficulty in ascertaining the number of completions would be the same at any point in time. And I noticed you might mention different ways of signing off and some substantial delays, which obviously has an impact on our income through council tax as well. So what steps are being taken to resolve that difficulty?
Okay, so I suppose on the first point, I guess the one reason why it's slightly easier at the end of year is that often this is when the private building inspectors, I guess mop up is probably the best word I can use. So any laxness during the year is they normally attempt to resolve it at year end. What that means is that we quite often get returns from private building inspectors at the end of year, which are almost corrections to previous returns. So in that sense, we quite often pick up additional completions at that stage. I suppose the other point is that at the end of the year, when we're working on the authority monitoring report, we obviously try to be really proactive in mopping up any other completions. So we try to be, try to apply the same scrutiny here. But at the end of the year, I suppose, it's not unforeseen that we might ring around some of the developers to get, accurate figures for what they think are completions, and then we obviously have to do a little bit of work internally to work out why that might be different from what's being recorded to us, and that's really the way in which we discovered that on Ponchase Nursery, for example, there were probably 40 homes being lived in at one point in time, and we'd only been told that 8 of those had been signed off by building inspectors. Now, clearly, I don't know the full reasons why that was, but that is a bit of the problem, I guess, with relying on that source of information. And in terms of the other ways of kind of monitoring completions, I mean, we can use obviously council tax sign-ups, I suppose, as an alternative measure of that. There tends to be, I would say, a slight delay in the house being functionally complete and it being registered for council tax. But it is, if members would find it useful, I'm more than happy to, for the next monitoring update, to give some regard to council tax registrations to see whether or not there is an appreciable difference between what's coming through the building control records and council tax records, and see whether or not that might provide a more accurate source of information.
I think, just interrupting here, I think anything that would give us a more accurate assessment would be welcome. It's as simple as that. So if you can do that, Dan.
That's fine. I think some of the difficulty with some of these very large private sites is that the way that they often get their houses signed off by building inspectors, they might do them in bulk, or they might effectively have lots of houses that are functionally complete, fit for people to live in, but the paperwork or whatever has not been filed until a point in the future, and then so that it does make it slightly difficult for us to be precise, I suppose, because if we don't have that information provided to us at the point in time that we're looking, it does lead to that delay that I mentioned of having to pick up additional completions, in the weeks and months that follow, rather than necessarily at the time.
Yeah, carry on, Chris. We'll come to you, Carol, don't we?
Yeah, I just think that 6 months is excessive, especially bearing in mind the number of properties. Especially as this has been brought up, albeit not at this committee, but in the past, where the council is losing revenue because it's not applying council tax when it should. I understand the criteria for applying council tax is that it's capable of, the property is watertight, it's capable of having the main services connected. So if you're getting those at a very later stage, that has an impact not just on the figures that you're giving us in the report, but on the whole council. So I think that should be looked at further as a way of improving that knowledge.
Who do you need to notify that to, Dan?
Well, we have contacts obviously in the council tax team, as you'd expect.
Okay.
So we can speak to them and understand, their process a little bit better, and hopefully we can give them an appreciation of our process. And if, hopefully there's an opportunity there to tie things up. We have spoken to them extensively in the past, and I guess that's where we've developed some of the understanding that there might be delays, and there is that. It's a bit of a dilemma.
Can we put the ball in your court? If you find that when we have our next meeting, if you find that this isn't going according to plan, then you raise it with us, and we'll make sure it does go according to plan.
I'm more than happy to give an update at the next subcommittee on how that conversation's gone. I'm more than happy.
Okay. Anything else, Chrissy?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Carol?
Yeah, I'm really from where Councillor Mrs Mason is talking about. One of the things I wanted to ask was going to ask about retentions, because some of these big building companies, they do like retentions. So would that be a problem to do with them not signing it off because they're waiting for the retentions to come through 6 months or a year later because they've got things to snagging issues to do with retentions, isn't it? That's one of the questions I was going to ask. The other question is, where Councillor Mrs Mason was talking about people council tax. Surely, if someone's moved in, they would be started charging the council tax straight away. It's no good a year down the line, and the people who've lived in the house wouldn't want a year's bill. What can we do as a council, I know you're talking about the people who do the council tax in our council. What can we do to make sure they are doing their job? I'm not saying they're not doing their job correctly, but improving the ability to do the role. The other questions I was going to ask. Is there any clauses that we can put in any of these building, these new building things that are coming up? I'm not sure. Maybe Ian might be to answer this question, because if we've got clauses within a building plan, surely they've got to keep to that particular date, aspect, or whatever it is. We need to make sure these are sort of.
Yeah, I suppose on the first point about how I guess you kind of define when a house is complete. I suppose there is the two main ways clearly are, when are they first registered for council tax? Because obviously that team has a definition for what a completed house is that they can obviously start charging council tax on. The kind of definition that we currently work to, like I say, is more about when has a building inspector gone round and signed off the building as effectively, compliant with building regs. In terms of ongoing snagging issues, what I would say, and I'm not a building inspector, and it might be that I can kind of return with a view from one of the council's building control officers, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the houses that have kind of snagging issues, etc., probably have been signed off mostly. So they might have ongoing issues or issues that perhaps develop after somebody has moved in. But clearly, if there are situations where people are moving into houses that haven't got final sign-off from building inspectors, then that's clearly not an ideal situation for us monitoring. But I think probably it would be a question I'd have to put to the council's building control team as to the likelihood of that happening and how that might then affect our monitoring. I guess there are two sides to it. Either are we recording completions where actually houses aren't fit for occupation yet? I'd like to think not. But the other side is, are we not recording completions in a timely way where actually the house is ready for occupation? So it might be something, if it's okay, that I return to the subcommittee with a view from the building control officers on, just because I guess there is a bit of a divide between the planning process and the building control process. And as you may know, whereas planning is, the council has a responsibility to plan, you can't go to somebody else to ask them for planning permission. With building control, you can appoint private, suitably qualified building inspectors who may have different processes to the council. Some of them are obviously fantastic, and some of them might be less good. And it might be that some of those less good ones are where we suddenly have some problems with in terms of getting paperwork back in a timely way and everything else. In terms of your point about putting things into, I guess, planning permissions, I mean, the real difficulty is, and I mean, there are conditions always on planning permissions about when a developer has to have started by, and it normally is 3 years. But as much as I think a lot of people hope that you could put something in there which really sets the developer, targets or something even stronger than that about when they have to complete houses by, it is not really an option, to my knowledge, to really require them to do that. I mean, it's conceivable that you might get a developer to agree a kind of legal agreement that really, or if it was a kind of a joint venture, they might agree to deliver a certain number of houses at a certain date, X, Y, Z. But I don't think it's really a power that councils can use to require developers to complete to a certain timetable. It tends to be, and it does cause some problems, it tends to be that once a developer has started, they kind of have forever and a day to complete that site. And I won't defend that because I don't think it necessarily is a good thing, but I guess it's, it might be a little bit beyond the council's influence to control that. Was there anything that I didn't answer?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the figures, I mean, I find the figures very interesting, but it's where it's a nightmare for you in the sense of everything is moving, and you talk about 2011 to 2018, the last 6 months projecting forward, and then of course you talk about the 20-year plan, and I can see new sites have come on stream. But are these net figures we're talking about, in the sense that at the same time as we're focusing on new completions, there must be some of our housing stock which is ceasing to be habitable, or for whatever reason disappears. So I'm just wondering where we sit. You talk about the 20-year projection, and in very round terms, 2,000 we know where they're coming from, which leaves us 5,500, that's 250 a year. We talk about 235 in one part of the paper. Then you mentioned 385. So it's trying to really get a real stake on where we are, rather than, I'm not suggesting for one moment we're massaging figures, but making figures tell the story we want to tell. And I accept there's an absolute, you have to provide a report. The other thing is, I just wonder whether we are exploiting all of our brownfield sites. There's a number of brownfield sites which are lying fallow, and I just wonder whether there's an opportunity for greater dialogue, perhaps with the portfolio holder, to look at brownfield sites to see what we can do to develop those and bring those into play.
So I suppose on your first point, so all the figures in terms of targets and delivery are always kind of expressed as net. So we do lose some homes to demolition, for example. So it might be, if you knock down a house and build 3 in its place, then that would really contribute to the district's housing supply. In terms of houses becoming uninhabitable, I mean it's kind of the reverse problem to the completions monitoring. Really, it's that when becomes a point where you can kind of robustly say, well, that house is no longer part of the housing stock of the district. So you'd probably say, well, if a house is just being, refurbished, if it's being, even if it's gutted and being refurbished, then probably at no point does that house stop being part of the district's housing supply. But there do come occasions, kind of from time to time, where you have to take a view that a house really is, and there's different ways of looking at it, but abandoned is one kind of planning definition, really, where a house really isn't fit for occupation. If it's got a huge hole in its roof, then probably you can't count it anymore. But it is difficult to monitor in the sense that nobody necessarily tells you that they've abandoned their house. So the only way we would really ever have of finding that out is either if there happened to be a planning application put in to redevelop it, which at that point maybe it becomes a little bit moot anyway, because if you're redeveloping it, then you're going to replace it. Or if that house can be deregistered for council tax purposes. And again, that's a question probably for my council tax colleagues, but if there comes a point where you can no longer count a house as being capable of collecting council tax against, then there's a good case to say that we should be knocking that off our net figures as a loss to the district's housing stock. But I must say it is quite rare, to my knowledge, for that to happen. It's probably more common that houses kind of fall into a state of relative disrepair, but probably haven't quite met the threshold to stop being counted as a house.
So just to be clear on that point, it's negligible, really. What you're suggesting is it's so negligible, it's not worth taking.
Against, I guess, the completions we see on a site like Hall Road, which might be, push 100 a year. We're probably talking about, fewer than 10 instances in a decade, probably, of losses in that way. On the brownfield sites, I mean, generally speaking, there is a kind of presumption in favour of redeveloping brownfield sites. So in terms of national policy, in terms of local policy, generally speaking, if a site comes in that meets policy in that regard, then the presumption is that it will be appropriate. Obviously, I don't want to step too much into development committee territory, because obviously every application has to come before development committee for consent. But no, very much before you even consider, Greenbelt release and other sources of kind of meeting the housing needs, then you do have to maximise those brownfield sites. And I guess it's, we publish a brownfield register. It's due for its annual update kind of imminently. So that is a kind of list of known brownfield sites in the district that are believed to be available, suitable and broadly viable for redevelopment. I guess there's always a case to say maybe we should be more proactive in how some of those sites come forward. Difficulty always being that they tend to be in private ownership, and unless obviously that the owner brings forward a planning application, then to some extent we can put it in as many registers and policies and plans and everything else as we want, but we're not always necessarily the telling vote, I guess, in those senses.
So through you, Chair.
Yeah.
So there is a catalogue. You're reasonably
Yeah.
confident that they are catalogued, and we've got, as near as we can be sure, a comprehensive list of brownfield sites.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the crucial thing is are they available? So there are an enormous number of sites that.
I suppose really distilling my point down, and you alluded to the fact, could we do more? Could we be more proactive? Do we need to do something to ensure that we are on top and making sure we're optimising the potential of those brownfield sites?
I think there's definitely a case to say that we should. I guess what I would say is that so there's organisations out there like Homes England and other organisations who we have something of a kind of embryonic dialogue with, who I think very much are pushing the kind of brownfield maximisation agenda. They may be able to offer support in cases where there are either land ownership issues, so maybe the landowner isn't willing to bring the site forward for whatever reason, or maybe where the costs of remediating the land or whatever it might be make it non-viable. There is support out there for stuff like that. I mean, as a team, and obviously taking into consideration obviously the economic development team, who I know you work with closely, there is, I'm sure, a desire to see more of those sites developed. But I guess it does come down to that: are they available? And there is always this kind of weighing up exercise, I suppose, to be had, because quite often, where the not necessarily the arguments, but let's say arguments are had, is then in detail about what's being proposed, because you have that kind of in principle presumption in favour, but then if what's being proposed fails to meet policy in other ways, then I guess that's often something that development committee will have to weigh up is how, and obviously I appreciate that it's relatively embryonic as well, but the council has a role in that through its assets programme as well, and other things like that. These are all kind of things that I guess people are pushing forward, but more could always be done, I'm sure.
Yeah, Mike.
Sorry, I know why I sit in another place now. I wouldn't sit that side. Just a couple of things.
Yeah,
I think on the point about the Brownfield Bridge, I think there's a key decision coming out this month on that. So on the Brownfield Bridge,
Yeah.
so I think that would be an up-to-date list, I would hope. Page 5.2 on the list there, you've got 18 Kingsman's Farm Road. Is that what I know as Shangri-La West, a new Park Home site?
I'd probably have to confirm.
Because I'm not aware of any new properties on the riverside of the road, because that's potentially not just one. I'm surprised. I know it's not necessarily strategic, but it's certainly going to deliver up to about 20, I think.
Yeah, I guess
we've
it's
listed others on the other page, whereas there's going to be 14. So potentially there's going to be up to 20 new homes on that site.
Yeah, I guess it's so. This is I guess logging how many homes have been delivered in that precise 6-month window. But
This might be coming back to where you are. I've certainly seen more than one delivered. I think it's been holding up traffic in Holbridge certainly up until September, and we must have seen around 10 delivered.
Well, it comes down to, I guess. So I suppose there are two things on that. I guess is that firstly, I guess this does only cover until the period of September 2019. So.
Yep.
It's very possible that there will have definitely been more delivered in the last 3 months. Ideally, I think we would have presented you with a table covering until the end of December 2019, but I think this meeting probably came slightly too soon to be able to give you accurate figures for that.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that they're up to September, there were at least 15 delivered. There's not been many delivered
Okay.
since, that was all. I'm
Okay,
not trying to be holding
well,
up, just
yeah,
is
no,
that,
that's okay.
that site, if there is, there's probably,
And I
if you
suppose
look at it, there's more being delivered than that.
it might come down to, I guess, what we've said
Yeah.
about some of the other about some of the delay with having that stuff. So it might be that they are functionally complete, but if the developer hasn't got the building inspector around for final sign-off or something, something like that, then it might be that actually we weren't aware at the end of September 2019 that 15 were delivered,
Yeah.
but actually, for all intents and purposes, they were. So I guess it comes back to, again, is what is our most accurate way of measuring that?
And that was the second bit I was going to talk about. Out of 3 items, by the way. You said what we class as commenced, or delivered, or completed. Sorry, I think commenced earlier. Completed. What does the government expect, or don't they define completed?
So they don't, as far as I'm aware, have a standard way of defining completed or commenced, but they do suggest that one of council tax records and or building control records is the best way of monitoring it. And I would imagine that up and down the country, probably different councils use different things. So I suppose what I think would probably be quite useful is if I have a conversation with the council tax team and try to work out, is there a case to say that council tax records are updated faster and more accurately than building control records, then there's probably a good case to say that's what we should be using from now on. Or is it the case, I suppose, that building control records are updated faster than council tax records? So
Couldn't we just use the earlier of? So you choose.
Yes,
so
yeah.
you say the earlier of building control sign off or council tax.
yeah, I'm sure we could. And
Because I'm not saying we massage their figures, but it gives us. If we
Yeah.
bring in more in, it shows that we
That's
are
the most
completing
sensible.
quicker.
Yeah.
no, that's a good point. I think it's. I'll have to understand, I suppose, from council tax how they do their reporting. But clearly there must be people who are having to log new sites, new houses, I should say, for council tax purposes. So it's just about, I suppose, having a timely access to that resource. And then
I think if the obvious solution, as we said earlier, as Mike said earlier, if you need us to get involved, that there isn't an easy solution to come up with this. You tell us, and we'll try and get involved at a higher level, and we'll get it resolved. Go on, Mike. Sorry.
I think I did have a third point, but I think it's been the council tax. I'm going to say about empty homes. If you bring an empty home in, do they count? But empty homes pay council tax anyway, don't they? So I don't think that's necessarily relevant.
I think it comes down to a little bit about that thing about are they abandoned or are they just empty? An empty house is still part of the council's housing stock, but an abandoned home isn't. And I guess it's a dilemma for us to have. I dare say there probably are a good number of empty homes in the district at any one time, but there aren't very many abandoned homes. And I guess the abandoned homes one is the more concerning one for monitoring purposes.
June?
Thank you, Chairman. Mine was kind of a similar thing to Michael's, but not quite the same. In the table 2 on 5.4, we talk about deliveries as December 2019. We talk about land south of Royal Lane Railing, 500 homes. But in the other document, the Housing Delivery Test Action Plan, we talk of Table 5 and 6 of North of London Road Railing, 550 dwellings, 2015-21, and nothing post-21. I'm a bit confused as to what we're actually talking about there. How do we recognise that huge development? Is it
So it is.
south of Royal Lane or is it north of London Road? And what is included in the 550? Because there is also a further number there that's not included in that.
That's it. Yeah. So they are broadly talking about the same site. So it is the West Rayleigh allocation. I mean, the 550 makes provision for. So there was the Grange Villas development as well.
54 or something.
So I think that's an amalgamation. But I take the point that we've been inconsistent with the site referencing there. I think the way the planning applications are normally referenced is normally land south of Rorath Lane and north of London Road, which may be a little bit more helpful for understanding where it is.
Council tax purposes, we're talking the same for Wolf Parish, I know. But it's just confusing because there's another 80-odd development. So.
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess, so in terms of this site, I think what we're trying to say on 5.4 is that the allocate, so the countryside element, or what was always referred to as the countryside element, so the large site, is obviously allocated for 500 in principle. It's got outline planning permission for 500. And we have information to suggest that 54 of those 500 have had a technical commencement. Now what that might mean is just that they've had foundations poured, or they've had... Yes. Yeah. Whereas I guess and I'll have to look at it, but I think probably what we're talking about in the housing delivery test action plan is probably the entire site laid within the entire allocation, which might include Grange Villas as well. Can I look at the back of that? I think
it does.
But in terms of being more consistent with how the site's referenced, I'm sure that's something that we can do. But is there anything specific about its delivery?
There is another 80 plus properties there, and we've got nothing there post 2021.
So that was, so are we 4.17, are we correct?
Yes, 5 and 6.
So table 5 is the trajectory that was accurate at the time of the core strategy. So that was the 2011 trajectory. I think, as we all know, that a lot of those sites didn't come forward as fast as we'd expected. So clearly, post 2021 is now going to be see far more delivered than was envisaged in the core strategy, mostly to make up the shortfall against the early delivery that never quite happened. So table 6 is, I suppose, the accurate as of today, almost. And for that specific site, we're estimating that 80 homes will be delivered before 2021 and 470 will be delivered post 2021, if that makes sense.
So I'm still not quite clear then as to what point of planning permissions that have been granted so far have caught up with this housing test plan. Am I allowed to mention the site? Has it Timber Grove?
I would have to look at the background spreadsheet to clarify exactly what contributes to this. I think probably it doesn't include Timber Grove because I don't think the legal agreement has been signed on that yet.
No.
So I think this is more the large site plus Grange Villas, because both of those have at least outline plan permission. I think the large site probably going to come through as a series of reserved matters rather than one big application.
So
now.
for me then that identifies that there is a chunk more that's missing.
And I think that's probably in the other sites. I think Timber Grove is probably a factor within that 660.
Right.
So the other sites includes other permissions, brownfield allocations, windfall sites, and probably it should also say sites with resolution to grant planning permission, because I think Timber Grove has been, as far as I understand, to development committee. I think the outstanding issue is the legal agreement.
Yeah.
So I think
So the question then from there is, are there any other sites like that we're not aware of in these numbers?
I think so. Timber Grove's the only one I know of that is pending a legal agreement. The other sites are the other sites listed are the allocations from the allocations plan, and obviously the core strategy. The vast majority of them have permission. The one that obviously doesn't is South East Ashington, which I think will be coming before development committee this year. And the vast majority of them actually have either full plan permission or outline and reserve matters. The only ones that I'm aware of that don't are, I think, the site in west of Little Wakering Road. I think that may not have reserve matters yet. And part of the West Rayleigh site doesn't. I think only the initial 192, I want to say, has reserve matters. I think the remainder is subject to future applications. So hopefully that's clear.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
Is anybody else? Right, I've got a few questions here that I've put down here. Is there anything we can do to ensure that private building inspectors supply us with their information more promptly, urgently?
So what I would say is that most of them are pretty good. So we get a monthly return from the NHBC which covers the majority of sites. The only one that I am aware of that we had fundamental issues with was Ponchase Nursery. So that's the only large site that I'm aware of that had significant problems with their returns. I think it's definitely a conversation I can have with the building control manager to see whether or not he perceives there to be anything we can do. I think it's difficult really, because it might be that, like I say, they might be completing the houses but not getting final sign-off, and there's probably not a lot we can do to compel them to get the houses signed off quicker, but perhaps there's something we can do to get them to report them to us quicker. So I guess we might be able to solve part of the problem.
Okay. Number 2, your projection of 212 houses against the 385 that we should have leaves a shortfall, as I see it, of 173. So, and you said that in your professional opinion at the moment, okay. Well, at what point isn't it okay? At what point do we say we've got a problem, our action plan isn't dragging us to where we should be, and that this situation potentially won't be getting better, the figures won't be improving, they'll just be either staying where they are or arguably getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
At what point is that? When do you say we've got to start taking a different form of action to our plan that we currently have in place?
So I suppose what I would say is that there's not necessarily any penalty for failing to build enough houses in any given year. So I suppose that's one reason why I'm saying it's not necessarily a matter for immediate concern, that there may be a shortfall. I guess there are two main ways in which your performance is monitored, your housing delivery performance is monitored. One of those is the housing delivery test, which is kind of looking back over the past 3 years. And if you haven't, over that 3-year period, averaged out, delivered enough houses, then you may have to put together an action plan. If it's really bad, then you may, the presumption in favour of sustainable development would apply. It's still not very clear how that affects Greenbelt districts. I'm not aware to date of any appeals where the inspector has taken the view that housing delivery is more important than Greenbelt. Castle Point famously won their case at Jotlands Farm, where they had very low housing 5-year supply, and yet the inspector still backed the Greenbelt over it. So I suppose, and sorry, the other way that housing completions are kind of measured is in terms of maintaining a 5-year supply of houses. So that's looking forward into the future. Are you going to build enough houses over the next 5 years to meet your targets? So the reason why I say it's not necessarily immediately concerning looking forward is that we have got all of those strategic sites now we'll begin to churn out houses. So we've got Holbridge, we've got West Rayleigh, we've got the remainder of Hall Road, we've got remainder of Great Wakering. Pending the decision of the Development Committee, we're likely to have South East Ashington. And together, those houses, we estimate, are enough to maintain our 5-year supply, or near enough. clearly, I think I've said this before, you know, if we are in a position in, say, 2 or 3 years' time, where we haven't identified further sources of housing to pick up where those sites will leave off, then we could face a situation where we struggle to demonstrate that, you know, we're going to build enough houses. I mean, the main way in which you would normally remedy that concern is obviously by introducing a new local plan, which might identify further sources of housing. And the idea would be to pick up where your last plan left off and hopefully maintain that 5-year supply of housing. It's still not 100% clear, I suppose, what the risks are to the council of failing to maintain that 5-year supply of housing. Because like I say, I mean, it's not as though there are lots and lots of districts around the country, Greenbelt district particularly, who are losing appeals for housing in the Greenbelt. But clearly, it's not necessarily a good or healthy place to be in to have, you know, a very out-of-date local plan with, you know, an inadequate supply of housing. So whilst the risks might be low, clearly it's, you know, it's something that all councils are expected to aspire to, is to obviously have an up-to-date local plan. And whilst, you know, one measure of being up-to-date is having a 5-year supply of housing, which we just about do, I cannot have certainty that will still be the case in 2 or 3 years' time if we haven't got a local plan through by then. And I think that's the difficulty, really. Is, you know, clearly we're still very much working on producing a local plan that we hope very much will be in place in 2 or 3 years' time. But you know, it's right and proper that the subcommittee monitor performance against that. And obviously I do my best to articulate what the risks are, but it's, yeah.
Simon, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, first of all, it sounds to me as if, first of all, you can take a defensive position, you know, in the light of, well, why are we not meeting the targeted figures? And, you know, the facts are the facts, you know. You can say economic environment, lack of, you know, whatever. But it sounds to me as if we ought to be being responsible and thinking about a new development plan. So that's the first point. The second point is we're being a bit inward looking, quite rightly, we're looking at our own, but the spotlight is likely to be shone on us if we are failing in relation to other authorities around us, and we are significantly different or below our target and they're doing better. So what monitoring do we keep on what's going on around us to see whether or not they're hitting the same issues? But certainly it seems to be crying out, because I think if we constantly adopt a defensive position, 2 or 3 years' time it's going to be too late, and then of course you've got a huge catch-up. It seems to me a responsible position for the authority to be in, to constantly review, update, renew, tear up the old one, do a new one, allocate sites, so that we've got a very clear position in for a challenge.
So I suppose the point to make on that, really, I guess, is that as a council we are working on a new development plan, really working on 2, I suppose. So on the local plan itself, you know, clearly it's a while ago now, but we did go out on issues and options on that, and there's been quite a lot of technical evidence work that's been done since then, and obviously we hope to go out to consultation on the next round, really probably in the summer, but clearly that's something that's going to have to come through this subcommittee. It hasn't progressed as fast as our adopted timetable envisaged. I think that's fair to say, and there's a number of reasons for that. You know, one of which is probably the changing kind of landscape in which we are trying to plan. You know, national policy has been changed twice in 2 years after staying the same for 6. So it's been, you know, there have been kind of new requirements that have had to be taken into account. And I suppose the other aspect of it really is the other kind of development plan that we are working towards, which is the kind of South Essex level stuff, which is still in relative early stages, but again has been a lot of technical evidence has been worked on that. And I guess the aspiration remains that we'll have that as a strategic plan, and then there will be 6 local plans underneath it from each of the constituent authorities, which are their kind of local strategies, with the key bigger picture issues being dealt with in the South Essex stuff. So very much we do work with our neighbouring authorities. Clearly we weren't one of the authorities who received letters from the Secretary of State. So Basildon, Brentwood and Castle Point received letters because their plans were approaching 20 years of age. Ours is, not coming up to 9 years old, which is, quite old, but not quite that old. And I suppose it is a risk in the background is that, if you don't progress a development plan in a timely way, then there is always a risk that the Secretary of State or a new Secretary of State or 4 Secretary of States from now might decide that Rochford, as it could be a number of authorities, we're not happy, and Castle Point, Basildon and Brentwood will testify that having received a letter like that, they've now had to really try and accelerate through their plans, and most of them are now kind of at the stage where they're toying with submission. So we have recently, we are in the process of responding to Castle Point's final local plan, which I think should be with members now, possibly. So what I would say really is that I guess I come back to that point about where we're at right now. The risks are relatively low, but clearly we are trying to progress a development plan as quickly and as effectively as possible, having regard to the failures of many, many development plans nationally at the moment for an enormous number of reasons. And it does seem a very difficult landscape within which to get a local plan examined and adopted. So we're having to obviously take lessons from all of those. But clearly, if in 2 or 3 years' time, we are not looking at a local plan, either ready to examine or had been examined, then the risks may well be greater. And I guess it's worth being aware of those risks, although they aren't necessarily amazingly clear right now. What those might be.
Christine.
Yeah, I was interested to hear what you said, but I'm also concerned. The new local plan is 2017 to 37, I believe. We're now 2020. The preferred site was due out last September. You're now saying possibly in the summer. That's a year late. There's not just the implication of problems for us as a council. There's the other problem is that when we go out with the local plan, one of the things that we're trying to do is engagement with the community. We had a tremendous high level of engagement with the community where originally, but it's so divorced by the time this comes around again that our public are going to wonder what we've been doing in that time. And also, you've mentioned that it's 9 years old, and that's not very old, but we were told as a council that we had to have an early revision. And I don't consider 10 years an early revision of a local plan. So is there anything that can be done to speed this process up? Because it would appear that it's slipping and slipping and slipping. And that is obviously a matter of concern. For many reasons.
No, I totally understand that, and I guess when we put those previous timetables to members, they were put with confidence and good faith that's the timetable that we would meet. I guess it's been challenging, I think, in terms of the relationship with the South Essex plan, in terms of the getting evidence in place to be able to justify a kind of preferred strategy, and those changes to national policy. I think it's been challenging to really make substantial progress on that in the time that we would have liked. I think what will definitely need to happen now is, I think probably the next meeting of the Planning Policy Subcommittee will almost certainly involve a new local development scheme with a new timetable in it. Like I say, our kind of internal thinking is that the next stage in probably late spring, early summer is realistic to allow us to get the rest of that evidence in place, but also to give members good time to consider that report. It obviously have to come to the subcommittee and probably council. So, you know, I mean, it's in terms of how it can be accelerated. I mean, it's, you know, we are having that conversation in house. You know, there are kind of some structural changes to the planning going on at the moment that, you know, may mean that we can, you know, better focus on actually progressing the local plan than maybe we have been able to. I think that's not an unfair statement. And, you know, I have relative confidence that where we're now at in terms of evidence and programme and everything else, that there should not be a slippage this time against that kind of summer date. But you know, there is still an amount of work to be done, and I suppose it's difficult to say how it can be accelerated. You know, you could put an enormous number of people onto it, but actually not, you know, in my experience, not actually the best resourced councils aren't always the ones that progress the local plans quickest, you know, so it is challenging, and I appreciate I haven't properly answered your question there, but it's
Can I just come back in here with one thing before we move on? You know, we're asking you to produce more and more information, produce better figures, one thing and another, and things are slipping. So I got, you know, the obvious root question that you've half touched on is resources, and do we have the resources to meet all these requirements that we are asking you to meet, that central government, full council, everybody is asking you to meet. Now, as far as I see it, there's the two of you. Now, I know we've been down this road before and we got told off last time, so we get told off again. And I understand you saying that, you know, we'll just keep throwing more and more people in, but it is, to my mind, an issue that we have got to address. And if we are demanding and requesting more and more information from you, then we've got to make sure we've got the resources in place to supply this information. I don't think it's rocket science, but we'll move on. But I don't expect you to answer that, Dan. I just hope it will be minuted. Yeah, and I'll come on to you, Carol. Yeah, go on.
Can I just come back on that? I think what concerns me is we have a timetable.
Yep.
And we don't keep to it. When you do a project plan, you should always keep your timetable, or there should be very good reasons that are laid out. And I haven't seen a project plan for that, and I haven't seen the justification. And I'm sure that would just put more work on you, so I'm not. But that's a concern, that what we effectively are having is, here's a timetable, here's a project path. We've failed, for whatever reasons, good, justifiable, I'm sure, but the dates are then moved. There should be another way of approaching that is more proactive, to try and keep within the original. Either the original timetable was unrealistic, or there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And it would appear to me that the only addressing that's going on is the change in dates, which is not your fault. It's not really an acceptable situation to be in. So, thank you.
Point time, Carol.
Thank you, Chairman. I think a lot of it's been said, really, and I'm going to go reiterate exactly what you've all been saying. We're taking two steps forward and 3 steps back, unless we can really sit down, or you can really sit down and literally say to us, this is what I need to do what the council are asking you to do. We're not going to get any further. We're going to come back to this same situation, and I think through you, Chairman, we need to have a meeting on this well in advance, much sooner than down in the summer or the spring or whatever it is, because we're not getting anywhere. We literally are not getting anywhere, and I've got great concern still with us relying on the builders signing things off. We've got to be much more stronger somewhere. I don't know how we're going to do it, what legal emphasis we've got to do, but we are literally just keep coming back here, we're going round and round in circles, and we are wasting our time. I have real great concerns.
No, I think we've all come to the same conclusion, Carol. I think, I hope Councillor Ward, as the portfolio holder for planning, is taking on board our concerns, and will be duly passing those up the line. I think if we need to make any further representation on behalf of this committee to full council, we will do so. I'm not quite sure how we can do it, but I think we will, and we need to. because, as I say, I think we've all highlighted our little concerns about things slipping, not meeting targets, not beating numbers. I'll get Sonia to give me some guidance, perhaps outside this meeting, how we can progress this with the people that need to be made aware of it. And I think, you know, I mean, in accordance with our earlier request from last time's meeting, I think the next meeting is going to be programmed for April. Between now and then, we need to have something in place other than, as Carol has suggested, just coming back and hearing, well, we're sliding and we're not meeting targets and then we're not. Go on. But yes, June, and then I'll come to Christine.
Just to really reiterate, say how critical this is to the council, and how long it is we've been making that point, and has there been any increase in resource? I don't think there has. And we just can't allow it to slip in the way it isn't fair to the individuals involved.
No.
And it's certainly not fair to council.
No. Christine.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we all agreed that there's the problem of slippage, and there's also, on the earlier point, there's the problem of a lack of joined up communication. And I know that at the last meeting we said 3 monthly meetings, but in view of, we're all saying the same things each time, perhaps why wait 3 months? Why not have an earlier meeting if that's something that you think would be constructive?
I think, if I may, if we say that April, which will give a portfolio holder and Dan time to come back with, but if, in your opinion, there is something worthwhile talking about before that, then we'll arrange an earlier meeting. But I don't want to come back in February and say, well, actually, we haven't got far enough down the road to propose anything. But April is the backstop. If we can do anything earlier, then we'll have it.
I just thought that if we had a meeting in March, we could always put something to discuss in April.
Maybe. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Well, quickly. Yeah, just on this point, nothing else, just on this one point.
Well, I just need to clarify something that was raised just prior,
Go on.
prior to that. With regard to Brownfield, we just needed a clarification with regard to, as we're bringing forward any Brownfield sites, just to clarify, would they be classed as windfall? And so any allocations we would still have to do. That was just wanted a clarification for this committee, basically on that, and also as far as the comments that have come forward. Yeah, we're going to. I'm having portfolio holder meeting I think next week. All these points where Dan will also be in attendance. We can then put all these points to assistant director and to make sure that they all go forward. You know, as far as that's concerned,
but
and look at the result.
But April is the backstop. But we
would
prefer something sooner.
If we have something concrete, a plan of action that reflects the concerns of this committee that we can bring forward earlier, most certainly we will hold that meeting.
Okay, members. Anybody got anything else? Carol,
why next week? Why not this week? The meeting, whoever you're supposed to meet with, just asking.
It's just been arranged. It's just been set in the diary for next week. That's it.
Okay. Anything else, Mike? You okay?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, members, if there's nothing else to raise, we have one resolution on here. The recommendation is, it is proposed that the subcommittee resolves that the housing delivery update report, April 2019, September 2019, be noted.
Chairman, can I just say, there was a point of clarification that I think needed to come in, which was not resolved. Sorry.
About the windfall site.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It was not resolved because that was a question that was asked and not resolved.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. So every house built in the district, regardless of whether it's greenfield, brownfield, in the plan, not in the plan, counts towards the monitoring that we do and counts towards the government assessment of our performance. So windfall, I guess, really just means that it's not in the plan, or it wasn't identified at the time of the plan being produced. And obviously now that we're, as we say, 10 years down the line, there is, quite a lot of the supply is windfall. Albeit, we've obviously got a number of allocations being built out now, but particularly the small sites. a lot of the small sites weren't identified at the time of the plan being put together, but it's now been 9 years, so those are windfall.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, on that point, I believe that we asked and it was agreed that a certain amount of the windfall sites could be incorporated because of the fact that we can prove that we have so many over a period of time. So presumably that should actually be in our figures.
Yes, so the windfall allowance is something that you can, so basically you can put in an unspecified windfall allowance when you're working out your housing numbers on the basis that you can prove that over the last 5-10 years you've consistently had, sites in the urban area, whatever it might be, come available for development, and they've always made a contribution. So these are, by their very nature, not sites that you know about yet, so you could just make an allowance. So that still very much remains the case. I think I said at the last subcommittee that probably in the region of 30 or 40 dwellings per year we could probably justify including in our trajectory. But obviously sites that we know about now aren't windfall, but they would still count. So if you were to put together a big, almost like a schedule of all sites, you put in all the ones you know about, however many they will deliver in each year, and then you have the bottom row would be windfall allowance, which is, let's say 30 per year, and then that all totted together gives you your overall supply. And that's what, when we take a new local plan to examination, that schedule will be the basis for the inspector determining whether or not we have found enough houses or whether or not we should look for more effective.
Can we not use that towards our delivery target as well?
In terms of 5-year supply, so 5-year housing supply, looking forward, I think a lot of councils, we don't to date, but I take the point on, consider it in maybe years 4 and 5. I think the view being that if you don't know about the site yet, then it's unlikely to deliver in the next 1, 2, 3 years. In terms of the retrospective housing delivery test, obviously windfall site, you know about all the houses that have been delivered, so you couldn't put it there. But I think when we do 5-year supply analysis in the future, we can definitely look at incorporating a windfall allowance.
I think it'd be helpful, thank you.
Simon, last question.
Chair, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but I didn't really get an answer on, and it may be outside this meeting, you're able to come back to us on other authorities, so we get a feel of where we sit in relation to other authorities. But certainly from what I'm hearing from your summing up comments, and I know you were keen to get to the bottom line of this report, but it really is quite worrying, and it's on my part, no implied criticism of officers here, but there's some real concerns, and I'm sure outside this meeting there's got to be some work done in terms of perhaps a cross-party working group. This is something that affects the whole of the district.
Yeah, I think that's outside this agenda at the moment.
But I just feel, we've touched on our concerns in terms of development, but there's a whole load of things, and I think what you're keen to do, Chair, if I understand, is to switch it from a reactive, where we're just noting things. It's very weak. It's really a very weak comment. We're noting something, so what? I think we ought to be stronger than that. We want to do more than noting it. There's strong member involvement to support and help officers come up with a solution on these things.
Yeah.
Much better member engagement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, all we've got in front of us at the moment is a recommendation, which resolves that the Housing Delivery Update Report, April 2019, September 29, be noted. I think if we're all happy to note that, but I think we've got enough issues, and I know that we'll close the meeting at 15:08, if we may, and turn off the... I think we've got some ideas.